The Democrats running for president in 2020 have been coming out against Alabama's abortion bill. The so-called Human Life Protection Act completely outlaws the procedure, except when the mother's life is at risk. It does not include exceptions for rape or incest. Abortion would also be criminalized, making it a felony punishable by up to 99 years in prison for doctors performing abortion-related acts. Women who have abortions, however, would not be prosecuted. State senators voted 25-6 on the measure after it passed overwhelmingly in the House. Alabama's Republican governor has not said whether she will sign the bill into law. The move is seen as an effort to get the Supreme Court to reverse nationwide protections for abortion rights. Here's what some of the 2020 candidates have said in response.
Well, this is an outrage, and it's nothing short of an attack on women's basic human rights and civil rights. And it's something that women of America are going to have to fight against with everything they've got.
It is, to me, a civil right, and this is about our Constitution, and this is about a Supreme Court precedent called Roe v. Wade that we have supported in this country. People can have individual disagreements, but as elected officials, you're supposed to be following the law. What they did in Alabama, what they did in Georgia is unconstitutional. The precedent is clear, and yet they've decided they're going to take away a woman's basic right to make a decision, and I think it's wrong.
The middle ground has always been, at least according to the Supreme Court, that no matter what you think the right thing to do in that situation is, we leave that decision to the person facing it in consultation, if she wishes, with her faith, with her doctor, and that's the best way versus me as a government official saying what ought to be done. That is the middle ground that most Americans believe in, but that's not what's happening in the South right now.
Our reporters Caitlin Huey-Burns and Kate Smith are covering this story for CBSNews.com. Their article is called "We Will Not Stand for It. 2020 Democrats Sound Off on Alabama Abortion Ban." And Kate and Caitlin are with me now. Thank you so much for being with us. Caitlin, let me start with you. On the political front, this issue of abortion is one that we have seen arise on the campaign trail. And I wonder, given the current climate that we're seeing now and the political landscape such as it is and the number of candidates in the Democratic field, how do you think this issue is going to impact the 2020 race?
Well, it's really interesting because the candidates and the voters so far in this primary have been really focused on issues like health care, on guns, and also climate change, as well as the economy. And while this issue of abortion rights come up, it's not been center stage, really, of this primary. And it's pretty interesting to us, we found, especially since after the Brett Kavanaugh nomination fight, the nomination that really tilted the makeup of the Supreme Court, Democrats, that was a real awakening for them. And they said that they would start to organize around the notion of courts and of issues like abortion. And we hadn't really seen that. Now, today, I think, really showed some kind of pivot point or turning point in this campaign, that you saw most every candidate running for president respond to the news coming out of Alabama and, as Kate has been reporting, out of these other legislatures, because they know, or they're trying to message to voters, that this is something beyond just a state issue, something that will eventually is planned to make its way to the Supreme Court. So they're trying to make it kind of a galvanizing force, and we'll see whether this continues on the campaign trail.
It has been interesting, Kate, to see what's been taking place at the state level. So in this state legislative session alone, more than 300 anti-abortion bills have been introduced across the country. Why do you think there's so much focus on this issue right now at the state governmental level?
A lot of that question can be answered by what's going on in the Supreme Court. So with the introduction of Justice Brett Kavanaugh, these anti-abortion activists, they really see an opening to potentially overturn or at least chip away at Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which is the other deciding factor on the Supreme Court that protects abortion access. So with those two things, they do see an opening to chip away at that and then give states back the right to regulate abortion themselves.
So could the pressure from these state legislatures actually be enough to get this before the Supreme Court?
It absolutely could. With the different breakdown on the Supreme Court, it could happen. And it'll all be a question of whether or not the Supreme Court chooses to take the case. So one of the styles of anti-abortion bans that we've been seeing are the heartbeat bills. And actually the Supreme Court has declined actually even listening to cases that involve that because they say they are blatantly unconstitutional. They go against decisions that they've already decided. Of course, that's before Kavanaugh. So it'll be really interesting to see if the Supreme Court just chooses to take these cases now with that different breakdown.
Well, on the topic of the Supreme Court, California Senator and presidential candidate Kamala Harris says that she's open to expanding the number of seats on the Supreme Court. And Caitlin, I wonder if that's something that we're hearing from other candidates right now. And what would the impact of such a move be? I mean, it would seem to be the implications would be enormous.
Exactly. This is a really interesting issue because you've had several candidates, Pete Buttigieg among them, talk about either expanding the number of seats on the Supreme Court or expanding or limiting, I should say, the tenure, the term, applying term limits. And this kind of goes to what Democrats are arguing about issues that they care about. Remember, they're proposing a lot of big and bold ideas. It speaks to this notion of, the Senate would be very difficult to get a lot of these things through, but also a court reacting to issues that they believe their voters care about. They're already starting to see. And so this is an idea that we've talked to legal experts about this, and it was something obviously championed by FDR and then never really happened, but we're seeing it talked about a lot in Democratic circles as a way to kind of respond to current events. And we'll see whether it gains a lot of traction. Now, you have had others who say that would be a step too far and something like a term limit on Supreme Court nominees would be important. But again, it goes back to this idea of whether Democrats are going to be like Republicans in making the court a real organizing principle of their party. We haven't seen that yet. We've seen Republicans be very effective at that, but we're starting to see Democrats realize that they need to keep up the pace.
Well, we mentioned Senator Harris at her event in New Hampshire today. Senator Harris was also asked about a report that senior members of the Congressional Black Caucus are pitching a Biden-Harris joint ticket with Harris as the vice president. Here's her response.
I think that Joe Biden would be a great running mate. As vice president, he's proven that he knows how to do the job.
Okay. Caitlin, translation,
Wow. I mean, we've seen candidates taking these subtle jabs at each other.
Not
but
so
this
subtle.
was not so subtle. This really speaks to, it's interesting being out with these candidates because they're asked, especially the male ones, would you have a woman as a vice president? Right. It's interesting to see who takes the question because it's inherently sexist. And so you saw Kamala Harris kind of saying, look, I'm tired of this. Right. I am running for president, and all the other women in this race should be too. And so this is a really interesting dynamic where she's trying to flip the script, and it did garner a lot of attention today.
But what does that belie about what might be taking place, though, within the Democratic Party?
Well, you have the most diverse field that Democrats have ever seen, and at the top of the polls, at least for now, are Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, when you have a record number of women running and others. And so I think this is a statement that she and others are trying to make, which is this is a long way to go, and I am running for this position of president, not vice president.
Right. If there's any need for further clarification, you know where to find me, right? Okay. So finally, we're seeing a bit of an escalating feud. It's been interesting between Joe Biden and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The New York Congresswoman criticized Biden over a report that he was looking for a middle ground climate policy. First, you'll hear Ocasio-Cortez at a Green New Deal event with Bernie Sanders Monday, then Biden in New Hampshire yesterday.
So often, when folks, particularly conservatives on both sides of the aisle, say, when they say that calling for a Green New Deal is, quote, too much, or too extreme, or too radical. No middle ground. No middle ground is right.
I've never been in the middle road on the environment, and I tell her to check, the statements that I made and look at my record. She'll find that nobody has been more consistent about taking on the environment and the green revolution than I have.
I mean, Caitlin, so this is a Democratic primary fight. How concerned should Joe Biden be about that kind of pressure and criticism from the left?
Well, I think it really demonstrates how the party in rhetoric, in addition to some substance and policy, has shifted pretty dramatically since the last time that Biden ran. But I was talking to a Biden surrogate just a little while ago who said that this kind of issue, Ocasio-Cortez going after Biden, could be something that could benefit him. This surrogate was is saying that while Donald Trump is trying to paint all the Democrats as socialists, that Biden can kind of point to these differences and say, that's not me, and try to keep his eye on the prize. But climate change is a really key issue for Democrats. And talking to people on the ground, voters, especially young people, want to see leaders take really dramatic action. And that's reflected in the rhetoric. And there is going to be this question about whether Biden can voice that, even if he's there on the policy, how he talks about it. I think a lot of people will be paying attention to.
The sound of gloves coming off, though,
Yep.
it sounds like already in this campaign cycle. Kate Smith and Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you.